So I am thrilled to be chatting this afternoon to Dr. Sue Dyson, who is an extremely experienced, world-renowned equine vet. Sue, thank you so much for agreeing to chat to me today.
You're very welcome.
It's brilliant. Sue, can you give us a bit of an overview of your long career as a vet, equine vet?
Well, I think I have to go back a bit before that because I was a rider. So I grew up as a passionate pony lover, and was fortunate enough to have ponies that I produced and competed on, and then horses. And it was through being a rider that I wanted to be an equine vet. And I was lucky enough to compete up to upper national level in both show jumping and eventing. And that's what piqued my interest in lameness and poor performance. And I think gave me a head start with in terms of understanding riders' problems, because I had ridden so many different types of horses. I had ridden for dealers. I had worked with a variety of different trainers. And so I'd had the opportunity to ride a large spectrum of horses, both lame horses and non-lame horses. And I knew what a normal horse felt like.
Yeah.
And I think without that, I couldn't have done what I've done within my veterinary career, because it's just given me a far greater understanding of riders' problems. So if a rider says the horse is hanging on my right rein, I know what they mean. And I also know all the different reasons why that might be the case.
Yeah.
And having had the opportunity to ride clients' horses, it's improved my ability to see what they are feeling.
Yeah.
And I don't see how I could have done that had I not been a rider.
Yes, it's a huge advantage actually, isn't it? Because I do wonder sometimes some vets who, perhaps don't ride, how, you can get across to them what's happening or, what you're feeling.
I don't think you can. And so many of them don't understand the importance of ridden exercise. So you go to them with a problem and they evaluate the horse moving in hand and perhaps on the lunge. They don't see anything. And there's a danger that they'll say there's nothing wrong with the horse. It must be related to the training or the horse's innate behavior. When I think that's not necessarily the correct interpretation.
Yes, yeah. So the documentary called The 24 Behaviours of the Ridden Horse in Pain, that's correct, isn't it?
Yeah.
Said that. It's recently been released. I watched it the other day and found it absolutely fascinating. How long did the research process take in order to produce this documentary?
Well, the initial work was carried out over about 4 years, looking at literally hundreds of horses and writing a series of scientific papers. And the documentary was really the accumulation of all that work, plus the clinical experience of using what we call the ethogram, which is the description of the 24 behaviors.
Yes.
So it was over many years, but the observations that behavior can reflect the presence of pain had been something I had observed for many, many years. So when we embarked upon the research, I was absolutely confident we were going to prove what we did prove, that the behaviors are a reflection of pain.
Yes.
But it takes time to do the research because you have to do it in a scientifically valid way and document it all, and all has to undergo peer review.
Yeah.
And to begin with, we had to get the work accepted by behavior experts. Yes. Because I'm not a behaviorist, I'm an orthopedic person.
Yeah.
So we had to engage both the help of a behaviorist in terms of being in part of the research team, but also get the body of work accepted by the behavior community before we could push it towards the veterinary community and the rider and trainer as well.
Yes, yes, no, of course. And was there a certain defining moment during your research that you felt like even more so? I mean, I know you sort of knew that bad behavior in horses can indicate pain, but was there a sort of moment when you just thought, right, this is just absolute, definitely.
I
A
think
good point.
probably the most exciting time was when we had developed the ethogram, which is the 24 behaviours.
Yeah.
And if the horse scores 8 or more of those 24 behaviours, we know that it has musculoskeletal pain.
Mm.
What we didn't know was how easy it would be to teach veterinarians to use it and how acceptant they would be of using it. And we got to a stage when we conducted a study when we recruited 10 vets who were varied in their experience. So we had some who were recent graduates, some who've been graduated about 5 years, and some were experienced graduates. And we had an equal gender balance, so similar number of males and females.
Yes.
They underwent some preliminary training, and then we had a study day when they had to evaluate 20 horse rider combinations. And these 20 horse rider combinations were volunteers who thought that their horses were normal.
Yeah.
And they had to perform a purposely designed 8.5 minutes dressage test,
Okay.
which was called to them. I didn't have to remember it.
No. I was going to say it's quite a long test.
It was a long test, but it was purposely designed so that we
Yes.
see specific movements and work on the right rein first and then work on the left rein. And it turned out that not all the horses were sound. The
Yeah.
soundness of the horses was independently looked at by another veterinarian. And in fact, 16 of the 20 horses showed low-grade lameness problems, which was not necessarily continuous. Sometimes it was only episodic, for example, in a 10-meter diameter circle to the leg.
Yes, yes.
But anyway, the excitement amongst the veterinarians who were being tested was amazing as they realized the power of the tool to differentiate between the horses that were comfortable and the horses that were uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it really was so rewarding for me to see the tool that we developed being used by these veterinarians who were so excited about this additional tool that they could go out and use in the field. And they could easily see how useful it was going to be for them in terms of helping when doing a pre-purchase examination, helping to tell a client that yes, their horse had a problem, helping them potentially when they're evaluating the response to nerve blocks,
yes.
hoping that the behaviours will go away when you've taken away the pain. So that was an amazing day, and they all uniformly expressed huge gratitude and wrote long emails afterwards spontaneously. So it was an amazing day.
Yeah. But did you get some that were sort of, you found harder, were more skeptical, or was it sort of?
I think those people, because they had volunteered to be part of the study,
they wanted
to buy into it.
Yeah.
But there have certainly been some skeptics when I first started to talk about the work, particularly the older male members of the.
I was going to say, I bet it was the men.
But it is growing in acceptance. There's no doubt about it. But it has taken time, as we knew it would, because people would say to me, if anybody else had done this work who we didn't have, they would never have had the credibility, and therefore we wouldn't have accepted it.
Yeah.
So yes, it's been a bit of an upward struggle, but I think
I'm sure. I'm sure it has. And do you think so? Riders perhaps need to sometimes focus more on the horse's sort of facial expressions when bad behavior is taking place, because I just noticed in the documentary there was quite a lot, you were sort of referring to, the look in their eye. And do you think things like that are sort of overlooked by riders? They're just looking for lameness rather than all the other factors.
Yes, I think historically they have, or they've recognized that the ears were back, but that's become normalized.
Yes.
Because we see so many horses. In fact, many of us learned to ride at riding schools, and many riding school horses, I think, are suitable as beginner horses because they're slow, and they're slow because they've got low-grade discomfort.
Yeah.
So those horses show many of these behavioral signs of discomfort. They're not very willing to go. You have to kick them. They swish their tails. They put their ears back. So that has become normalized.
Yeah.
And we need to be taking a fresh look and educating people that a happy horse looks completely different.
Yes.
A happy, pain-free horse has its ears forward. It has an engaged expression in its eye. It responds to your cues as you would expect a normal horse to do. And it improves progressively with training.
Yes.
Yes, so we need to kind of reset what is normal in people's eyes. We have to get them to look, but then make them realize that what they had accepted was normal is not normal.
No. And what would you say is the most useful bit of advice you could give riders in identifying if their horse is actually in pain or just being, bloody naughty?
Well, I don't think there are that many genuinely naughty horses.
No.
I think that, and I can say from personal experience, I bought a known rearer very cheaply as a late 4-year-old. And I bought him because I thought he had a talented jump. And he did nothing else but rear. There must have been something that provoked that rearing behavior. Behaviors are easily learned, and rearing is a very easy evasion for a horse to perform. And once a horse has learned something like that, it takes a long time to unlearn
it.
But that horse showed no other signs of behavioral abnormality, and to my mind was clinically sound. He was an advanced horse eventing by 7 and went to the Olympics, not with me. I sold him at 8 years
old. Oh, I know. Yes.
So that horse had one behavior. I think if a horse shows multiple different behaviors, which are not normal, that are part of the 24 behaviors of the ethogram or the ridden horse checklist, then that reflects the fact that the horse has got discomfort. So if the horse, for example, rears, spooks, has a hind limb toe drag, puts its ears back, bucks going into canter, that combination is immediately ringing alarm bells in my mind.
And because I sort of was watching and I was sort of getting paranoid, going, oh yes, my horse has got a slight tilt at times, which I think is actually a training thing, but it's more than one. I mean, it needs to be, because there was mention of, is it 7 or more?
8 or more.
8 or more displays of, those behaviours.
We have the 24 behaviours, each have strict definitions. So, for example, ears back for 5 seconds or more. Mouth opening for 10 seconds or more with separation of the teeth. So if we have 8 or more of those 24 behaviours, then it tells me that that horse has got musculoskeletal pain. But if it just shows 2 or 3, that's within the normal range. And if you take each of the individual behaviors, there could be a number of different reasons why the horse showed those behaviors. So that's why it's important to think about it as the total score and not
the individual.
Not to get hooked up on, oh, my horse tilts its head a lot. Well, it might have some mouth pain, or the bit might not fit, or it may be a training problem. But if it only tilts its head and doesn't do anything else, then it's a non-specific finding.
It's so interesting, the whole thing. And so what would be the best advice you would give a rider who perhaps has a horse that is sound but is displaying 8 or more of these behaviors, I suppose, to their vet, and explaining all of that and start nerve blocking? Is that right?
Yes. I think that the only way we establish where pain is coming from is by the use of nerve blocks. But in saying that, we always have to think about the interaction between the horse, the tack, and the rider. Because as we saw in the documentary, an ill-fitting saddle can induce discomfort and can induce some of these behaviors. So when it comes to clinical investigation, we have to be thinking about, is the horse lame or sound? does the saddle fit the horse, and does the saddle fit the rider? And we've also shown in a study of nearly 200 horses that the rider sitting on the back 1/3 of the saddle can have an influence on the display of these behaviours. So saddle fit to the horse and the rider are important features.
Yes, very, aren't they? And in your documentary, there were some interesting statistics about event horses, where I think you said that horses that scored 7 or more of the 24 behaviours were twice as likely not to complete the cross-country phase, is that right, than horses that scored below the 7. That's
Yes,
fascinating.
yes. I started by applying this ethogram to horses warming up for dressage on the second day of dressage at Burghley.
Okay.
Really, because I wanted to just check that well-performing horses were scoring low. And at the end of that day, I was aware that I had a group of horses that scored between 7 and 9. And I thought to myself, I wonder how they're going to perform in the rest of the competition. So I looked at their scores online afterwards and realized that those horses that were scoring 7 or more were having more problems cross country. And I thought, wow, that was really interesting. We need to get more data. So then I scored both days of dressage at the following Badminton and Burghley. And got exactly the same results. And statistically, this was very highly significant. So if the horse scores 7 or more of the 24 behaviours during the warm-up for dressage, then it will have higher dressage penalties. It will be just over twice as more likely to be eliminated or retire cross-country. And of those horses that finish, they will have lower finish places. Horses that score less than 7. So there's clearly a relationship between their ability to perform at that level and the presence or absence of discomfort. And we then followed up by a study of 1,010 horses competing at novice or BE 90 or 100. Then we applied the ethogram actually during their dressage tests. And again, we saw a relationship between the ethogram score and their performance. So those horses in the top 3 in each section had lower scores than everybody else. And it was very rare for a horse to score 8 or more behaviours and finish in the top 3. Very rare. So it was fascinating that even at the lower level, pain is potentially influencing performance. And we actually saw a higher frequency of occurrence of overt lameness during the test in those lower level horses compared with the higher level horses. And everybody tends to think, they question the rights and wrongs of competing horses at 5-star level, but in fact they are more comfortable than the lower level horses.
And do you think anything needs to change in the standard of judging, particularly at lower level eventing? I mean, and higher level perhaps, but maybe lower level.
I would say yes, because we've also done this study with Grand Prix dressage horses as well, and shown exactly the same thing. And at elite level, they are scoring better than at sub-elite Grand Prix level. But it's clear when you watch hundreds or now thousands of dressage tests warming up, that a large proportion of horses are ridden with their heads behind the vertical position. And they are not being, in my mind, suitably penalised by the dressage judges. And this is across the board, from Grand Prix level down to grassroots level. And I do think that if horses are worked constantly with their heads behind the vertical, it influences their entire body movement and their ability to develop top-line musculature, the ability to learn how to push from behind.
And then probably get more problems.
Yes, I think it predisposes to problems, and I think it makes those horses less adjustable to ride cross-country if you're going to be eventing. So I think that judges ought to be judging what they see across the board. because the rules for judges are very clear. The front of the head should be in a vertical position or just in front of a vertical position. So how can a horse at novice eventing level win the class with 22 penalties when its head's been behind the vertical all the time?
Yeah.
Now, the horse probably was the best of the group,
Yeah.
so it probably deserved to win, but it shouldn't have had a score of 23.
No.
Because every single movement, the horse's head was behind the vertical.
Yeah.
And I know the judges don't see this, because when we were doing the study of 1,010 horses, I was standing just to one side of the judge's car. So I got a relationship with the judges, and they would often come and chat to me in the breaks. And this horse, which scored 23, the judge got out of the car immediately after the test and says, "Wasn't that a lovely test? Wasn't it lovely to see a horse with its head in the vertical position all the time?" And I
It wasn't.
to myself, and then thought, well, at least I've taken some photographs. I can go back and look at the photographs. And in every movement that was photographed, the horse's head was way behind the vertical, more in canter than in trot.
Yes.
So clearly they are not judging what they see. And I think Pammy Hutton wrote a very good article in Horse and Hound about 18 months ago, saying exactly the same thing. Judges should be brave enough to judge what they see, and not, or maybe they need to learn to see better.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Because I think if the judges penalised horses for being worked with their heads behind the vertical, that would force the riders and the trainers.
We'd all think right.
Yeah. And they would do it right. And I think that would be better for the longevity of the horses in terms of reducing injury risk, and also be better for their performances overall.
Yeah. And so do you think how quickly do you think bad behaviors, say you've taken away the pain, whatever the pain was, and the horse, you know, is now comfortable, how long do you think, or if ever, you can eradicate these negative behaviors associated, you know, with pain? Once all is fixed, I suppose it depends on.
Well, we know that the majority, it's almost instantaneous, in that if I do nerve blocks, which I'm using local anaesthetic to desensitize various parts of the limb, and once I've taken away the pain, the horse will, its lameness will go, it will have a better quality movement, and the number of behaviors it displays will immediately go down. So a horse may have a score, for example, of 12 out of 24. It goes down to 3 out of 24 immediately. So it has not become habitual.
No.
It's a direct response to pain.
But things like rearing, you know, sort of behaviours, evasions that they have learnt to do, probably as a result of, you know, perhaps the pain. I think breaking those habits.
I think if all the horse is doing is rearing, then that has become habitual, and we need to identify the circumstances which provoke the rearing and figure out how we're going to retrain the horse under those circumstances. Yes. So, for example, my horse that I bought as a late 4-year-old that reared, to begin with, he wouldn't even go out of the yard without rearing. But progressively, I learnt how to tell him to trust me, that it was okay to go out of the yard, and it was okay to gallop across a field, because he would almost have agoraphobia. It was in the middle of a field that he would rear. And then it finally got to the stage when the only circumstances under which he would rear was if you were at a competition and you were at the start of cross country and a horse was finishing towards him, which he found terrifying. But if you removed him from that situation, he was fine. But there was something about that situation that triggered the behavior. But if you removed him from that situation, he had by that time stopped completely. Yeah. So I think that with appropriate training, you can eliminate behaviors which may have been instigated by pain way back when.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting when you look at behaviors during tacking up, because we've shown that there's a relationship between abnormal behavior during tacking up and mounting and the presence of lameness or poor saddle fit. And those behaviors take longer to resolve, so that I have to have identified the problems and removed the problems for probably at least a month, if not 2 months. And then the horse will gradually go back to reacting normally to being tacked up and mounted.
Yes.
And if it was moving away from the mounting block prematurely, it may need to be retrained that it has to stand by the mounting block. So then you've got a combination of removal of the pain and again retraining so that the horse behaves as it should do.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think, I mean, rider skill must have an influence on the behaviour of some of these horses?
Well, that's an interesting question. And we had observed in clinical cases that I was investigating that if the rider wasn't very good, the horse also had musculoskeletal pain, it may show, for example, 8 of the 24 behaviours. If I put a better rider on, the behaviours would change, but the total score would remain the same.
Okay.
And it was only when the pain was removed that we had the resolution of the behaviours. So we then did a study when we took 40 horse rider combinations. They were all volunteers, and they were ridden by their own rider and by a single professional rider. And 50% were ridden first by the professional rider and then the normal rider, and 50% were ridden first by the normal rider and then by the professional rider. And they all performed the same 8.5 minutes dressage test, and we scored their behaviours. And we found that overall, with these 40 horse rider combinations, that the total scores remain pretty much the same despite the rider skill. The better rider could generally make the quality of the trot and canter better.
Yes.
And sometimes that made the horse look lame because they were working harder and they hadn't looked lame before. And now because they were being asked to push from behind more, they looked uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Or sometimes if there was a low grade intermittent forelimb lameness, the better rider may mask that.
Yes.
But the better rider could not obscure the signs of pain, which is why I think
that's a good thing.
The checklist or the ethogram is so valuable if you're going to try a horse with respect to thinking about buying it, because a skilled professional rider may be showing you the horse and it may look pretty good, but if it's showing multiple abnormal behaviors, then it's probably got
a warning sign.
A warning sign, yes. You get on the horse, it doesn't go as well for you, and the vendor says to you, oh, well, you're not using the right cues. The horse isn't understanding what you're asking. But it continues to show these abnormal behaviors. So the professional rider can ride the horse better, but he cannot or she cannot obscure the behavioral signs of discomfort.
Oh, it's all so interesting. So what is the best advice you could give a rider who's got, the horse is sound and the vet says there's nothing wrong with it, but it's displaying, 8 or more of these signs?
Well, I always say to people, if you're a human athlete, you don't go to your GP if you've got a knee injury, for example. You would go to a sports medicine specialist.
Yes.
And I think it's the same with horses. These horses are athletes.
Yeah.
You can't expect every equine vet to be a specialist or have a particular interest in ridden horse problems. But you need to be working with a vet that does have a specific interest in lameness and performance-related problems. Yes. Because that's the way you're going to get the appropriate investigation. I'm not trying to denigrate general purpose vets because they're doing a great job. They are more skilled in many areas than I would have been. But you have to develop specific specialist attributes, I think.
Yes.
And if the vet is not used to looking at ridden horses, they're not going to be able to investigate your horse properly, I don't think.
No. Oh, Sue, it's so fascinating. I think everybody involved with horses, trainers, riders, everybody should watch this documentary. Is YouTube the best place for them to go and find it?
Yes, there is also a website,
Right.
but I'm not going to be able to settle.
Oh, don't worry.
I can
I
send
will
you the
put
link
it
to it.
in the, when I, publish the interview, I will put the details. I'll find
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I can send you the details. That's not a problem.
Okay, fantastic. Well, honestly, it's just so interesting. And I think a lot of members will find it fascinating as well.
Good.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.